Okay, again, problems surrounding the Reconstruction of the South. And the first subtopic is major problems demanding solutions following the Civil War.
Long title.
Yeah, it's pretty good though. Now, you all have heard of the Reconstruction. And the Reconstruction really occurred between 1865 and 1876. That period of time, those 12 years, become known in American history as the Reconstruction. Between 1865 and 1876. And when we talk about 1865, we're talking about some of this starting in 64. So 12 years is what they consider the Reconstruction, basically between 1865 and 1876. Because I mentioned Lincoln was making plans in 64. Remember that? Okay, and the Wade Davis bill was part of that. So I could actually say between 1864 and 1876, the United States was trying to solve these post-war problems, and that 12 years in history is referred to as the Reconstruction. Now, we got to keep in mind that these were the three major problems that demanded solutions. I don't know if you need to write these down because we talked about it. What term should the Confederate States be readmitted to the Union? How should Confederate leaders be treated? Okay? But maybe more importantly, what are we going to do to help those former slaves adjust to the freedom in the United States? That was Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner's biggest issue. Is what are we going to do with these hundreds and thousands of slaves that all of a sudden have freedom? They've never had freedom before. How are we going to deal with those? And Lincoln had a pretty good plan for that. But remember, he has been assassinated. So the man who's going to inherit these problems of reconstructing the Union is going to be Vice President Andrew Johnson. He's the guy that's going to inherit this. And I think I told you this in passing in the last lecture, is that Johnson agreed with Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. And he intended to put Lincoln's plan into use, which was a little unusual because maybe they were polar opposites, but yet I think that Johnson, even though he was more of a supporter of the North during the time that he was in Tennessee in politics, but he did want to see the South treated fairly. So he thought Lincoln's plan was a good plan, and Johnson was going to continue Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Before we talk much more about what Johnson is going to do and what happens to him, let's tell you a little bit about the guy, okay? A little bit about President Johnson, so you have a little bit of an idea of what the guy was like. First of all, he was a self-educated man, which tells you that he had no what? Formal schooling. Yeah, he was a self-educated man and grew up with no formal schooling. And as a lot of people did at that time in history, he married fairly early. He was just 18 years old, and his wife Eliza, E-L-I-Z-A, was just 16. So he married at 18 years old, and he married his wife Eliza, E-L-I-Z-A, and she was just 16. And that was not horribly unusual, although she would be the youngest married first lady in history. In other words, of all the first ladies we had, she married the youngest. Okay? Now this is kind of interesting. The Johnsons had 5 children. They had 3 sons and 2 daughters. They had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. And 3 of those 5 died before the age of 36. Lost 3 of their children by the age of 36. So the Johnsons had 3 sons and 2 daughters. And 3 of those 5 children died before the age of 36. I don't know if you necessarily have to write this down, but the 3 boys, Robert died at 35, Charles at 33, and Andrew Jr. at 26. And then the girls, Martha, lived to be 72 and married at 50. But, I mean, 4 out of the 5 didn't live very long lives. 50 is the max. So their children did not have a good life expectancy at all. Well, Johnson's political career began when he was elected mayor of his local community in eastern Tennessee. So his first political job ever was he was the mayor of his town, so to speak. He was mayor of the community he lived in eastern Tennessee. And he did a pretty good job there, and he became pretty well known. And he decided that politics was the way to go, and so he's going to make his career, his life, that of a political nature. So his first political position he was elected to was the mayor of his local community in eastern Tennessee, and he will go on to serve in many positions, which we'll tell you about now. In 1843, he was elected to the House of Representatives, representing the state of Tennessee. In 1843, Andrew Johnson was elected to the House of Representatives from Tennessee. And he served 5 terms, which would be how many years in the House? How many year terms do you have in the House? 2. So he served 10 years, 5 terms. Elected, then re-elected 4 times. And then in 1853, after serving 5 terms in the House of Representatives, Johnson was elected governor of Tennessee. Governor of Tennessee in 1853. He was elected governor of Tennessee. And he served 1 term as governor, and then he was elected to the United States Senate in 1857. So he's elected the House of Representatives in 1843, serves 5 terms. He then is elected governor of Tennessee in 1853, serves 1 term as governor, and then he's elected to the United States Senate in 1857.
You can borrow Maria real
Okay.
quickly. She's got to take notes.
Okay. Now, as far as Mrs. Johnson, they were obviously married during plenty of this time, if not all, because they married at 16 and 18. And she really supported her husband during his political career, but she really tried to avoid public appearances. She didn't like that type of thing. So she wasn't the normal political wife, buy your husband out in the public. She didn't like that. She supported it, very much so, but she tried to avoid public appearances as much as possible. She did not like that. She was not very social. Matter of fact, she wasn't even able to serve as First Lady when he became president because her health was so poor from tuberculosis. So she didn't even serve. She was actually confined to her bedroom most of the time in the White House. So she wasn't one of these wives that was out with her husband. So when his political career, from the time he was elected mayor through the Senate to the presidency, she tried very hard to avoid public appearances, and her health was so bad during the time she served as First Lady, she really couldn't serve as First Lady. She had the name, but she never really went into any of the social functions or anything because she was confined to her bedroom because of tuberculosis. So whenever there was a social event to go to, she sent her daughter, Martha Johnson Patterson, to those social events, and she served in the capacity of, quote, First Lady during social events. So you didn't see much of Eliza Johnson. She stayed in the background during her husband's entire political career and never did really serve in a capacity of First Lady because of her poor health from tuberculosis, and was confined to the bedroom in the White House most of the time he served as president. And her daughter, Martha Johnson Patterson, attended those social appearances in her absence. Now, you got to remember about Johnson, is he considered a Southerner from Tennessee? Yes. But he stayed loyal to the Union. And he resisted, when Tennessee seceded from the Union, he resisted that. He spoke out against the southern state of Tennessee from seceding from the Union. So, although a Southern Democrat, he was viewed by many as kind of a Northerner, kind of a loyal person to the Union. So he would have been one of these people that could have served in political office due to Lincoln's Reconstruction Plan, because he was a man that stayed loyal to the Union. Well, has he had a pretty successful political career? Very successful, and that's why Lincoln added him as the Republican vice presidential candidate in 1860. That's why he did that, okay? And he kind of wanted to, 1864, he kind of wanted to balance the ticket there a little bit, because what did he know was coming up? Reconstruction. So Johnson's success in politics is what lured President Lincoln to add him to the Republican ticket during the election of 1864. Now, what's going to be the difference between him and President Lincoln concerning the radical Republicans? Any difference? there'll be no difference. The radical Republicans will despise Johnson as much as they despised Lincoln. So if he, as Johnson tries to carry out his plans for Reconstruction, he's going to face serious opposition from Northerners, especially the radical Republicans, because they believe this now Lincoln-Johnson plan for Reconstruction is way too easy on the South. Now, as I mentioned to you before, who controlled Congress at this time? Which party? Democrats or Republicans? Republicans. And who controlled the Republican Congress? The radical Republicans. So you've got kind of a bad situation for Johnson, because not only does he have the opposite party, so to speak, because he's a Democrat controlling Congress, but the radical branch of the Congress is controlled by the majority branch of the Congress is controlled by the radical Republicans. Well, Congress passed a couple of laws to ensure their philosophy on Reconstruction of the South would be followed. The first one was called the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and the second was called the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So these Northerners who controlled Congress passed two laws early, during the time Johnson was president, to ensure their philosophy on Reconstruction of the South. And they were not bad laws. And we'll explain them to you. The first one was the Civil Rights Act of 1866. What do you think these two are going to have to do with?
Slavery.
Well, not kind of
Rights
slavery,
Act.
but we're dealing with former slaves.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what the Civil Rights Act of 1866 did is it granted citizenship and equality to all blacks, or all Negroes, or all colors. Okay? The Civil Rights Act of 1866, this law was passed in April of 1866, and it granted citizenship and equality to all blacks. Okay, when Congress passed that law that granted citizenship and equality to all blacks, it goes across the president's desk for his approval or non-approval. And according to our video that we watched on Andrew Johnson, what do you think action he took on the Civil Rights Act of 1866? He absolutely vetoed it. Yep. Because remember, he didn't believe blacks had any rights.
No, he was a hardcore racist.
Yeah, he was kind of a hardcore racist. He didn't think blacks had any rights. So he vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Does that mean it didn't pass? No, but he vetoed it. Okay. The second, probably most important of the two, obviously, was the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And this was passed in 1868, and it stated two specific things. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. One was very controversial. The first part of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution was that all people in the United States were citizens of the United States, black and white. So if you were someone that lived in the United States, you were a citizen of the United States. So it basically didn't discriminate between any races. If you lived in the United States in 1866, you were considered a citizen of the United States. But the one that became a little controversial, the second part of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, gave all male citizens, black and white, what? The right to vote. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution gave all male citizens, black and white, the right to vote. Now, remember those states that wanted to get into the Union? Remember, part of the Wade Davis bill is that they had to do what? They had to put in their constitutions the abolishment of slavery, which Lincoln didn't like because he thought it should be an amendment to the United States Constitution. Well, with this particular passage of the 14th Amendment, a southern state now had to ratify that constitutional amendment, the 14th Amendment, before what? They couldn't do what unless they ratified this? That's right. To be readmitted to the Union, each southern state had to ratify this constitutional amendment. In other words, if you ratify it, that means you do what?
Put it in the.
Like becomes, and you accept it. In other words, if you're gonna come back into the Union, you're gonna have to accept the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, that all people that live in the United States are citizens, and all males, black and white, will now have the right to vote. And if a state refused to ratify the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, they might bring him back into the Union, but what aren't they gonna give him?
Voting rights.
That's right, and how do you get voting rights? You have congressmen and senators. They're gonna reduce their representation in Congress. So that was kind of a double-edged sword, because you want to get them back in, right? So you eventually let them back in, but if you don't ratify, you're not gonna have any representation in Congress. We're not gonna recognize your senators and your members of the House.
So, if these southern states didn't want in the Union in the first place, why wouldn't they just be like, all right, whatever?
Well, that
stay out of the Union?
you might think they didn't, but they had nowhere to go. They had nothing going for them. I mean, they really did, but I mean, I get what you're saying, but eventually they're gonna have no choice because they have nothing down here. Everything's been destroyed. The only way they're gonna get reconnected is they're gonna have to join the North, and that's what they do. And people like Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, made darn sure that we preserve this Union. Now, who does the 14th Amendment cause bitter feelings with?
So,
Girls. Women. Because the black man can vote, who just got citizenship, who not long ago was kind of a, quote, lowly slave, and an upstanding female like myself cannot vote. Seriously, I mean, that was the thought process. It made tremendous bitter feelings among the citizens of the United States, especially women. Now, there obviously were men that thought that's not right. Gee, my wife should be able to vote before a black man. So it caused a lot of bitter feelings, because a black man could vote and a white woman could not. And probably the most outspoken women's rights leader at the time concerning the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, kind of the first women's rights leader in America. And she spoke out vehemently about this. She believed that the 14th Amendment would cause ill feelings between black men and white women forever. Okay, so Elizabeth Cady Stanton kind of led the charge in protest of women who said, wait a minute, the black man can vote and the white woman cannot? It just doesn't make any sense.
Was she related to Edwin Stanton?
No. Now, what do you think happened when that came across President Andrew Johnson's desk? You like that one? He adamantly opposed it, because again, he did not think black people had any rights. So certainly didn't think the black man should have a place to vote. So if you're the radical Republicans and everything you throw by Johnson he vetoes, what might be your next step?
Get him out of there.
That's right, let's get him out of there. So because of his opposition to everything the radical Republicans were doing, they're now going to set their sights on trying to remove him from office. That's going to be their next one. If he doesn't want to agree with this, we're going to remove him from office. Now, how do you remove a president from office? Okay, you have to impeach him. And who does that?
Congress.
What branch? Opposite. If a president is going to be impeached, he's going to be impeached by the House of Representatives. And what does impeachment mean? Anybody know if you're impeached, what that means? That means you're accused of something. You're accused, and in the case of a federal office, you have to be accused of high crimes and misdemeanors. In other words, you're accused of breaking the law. And if you get accused of breaking the law and the House feels like you've broken the law to the point you should be removed from office, the House of Representatives impeaches you, accuses you of something, and puts you on trial. Who tries you? The office of the House, the Senate. But the judge that presides over an impeachment trial is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's like the judge. But the people that vote whether you're impeached or not and thrown out of office is the Senate. So you're impeached by the House, tried and possibly convicted by the Senate, with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as the judge. Okay, that's how it works. Well, before they can impeach Johnson, what have they got to do? Well, they got to accuse him of something, you know. And the little you know of him, what might they get after him about that would be slanderous? It can't be that.
Is education in it?
No. What would we not taught? If I came to school in this condition every day, I'd probably get fired.
His alcohol.
I'd get impeached. What about it?
He was drunk all the time.
Yeah, he drunk at his inauguration, right? So the first thing that the radical Republicans accuse him of being they accuse him of being a drunkard in the White House as President of the United States. We got a drunk in the White House, never sober. So that's the first thing they accuse him of, is being a drunkard while serving in the White House. Now, this next thing they accuse him was interesting. It might have to do a little bit with the fact that his wife was somewhat incapacitated, bedridden. What else did they accuse him of?
Sleeping with his daughter.
Well, not that quite that crazy, but hey, listen up. She's not that far off. They accuse him of harboring a harem of loose women in the White House. Basically accuse him of having prostitutes brought into the White House, is what they accuse him. So they kind of start these rumors. They're not even charges. They start getting after his reputation. The guy's a drunkard in office. Really wasn't that far off. He was bringing in a harem of loose women into the White House. He was bringing prostitutes into the White House. But that's really not enough. I mean, just to accuse somebody. So finally, to get the job done, Congress passes a new law called the Tenure of Office Act